Have you ever been judged before anyone even looked at your heart? Imagine stepping onto a plane, carrying nothing but a ticket and your dignity, only to have it shredded in front of dozens of strangers. That's exactly what happened to Danielle Brooks, a black woman, a CEO, and a visionary leader who faced humiliation in the cabin she rightfully belonged to. In that instant, the world seemed to shrink, leaving her with a choice bow to prejudice or confront it with courage that could change everything. What would you do if every eye in the room judged you? Every hand seemed poised against you, and the power to defend yourself felt just out of reach. Could you stay calm, measured, and resolute while injustice played out before you? And if you had the chance to turn that moment into accountability, not just for yourself, but for others, would you seize it? This isn't a story about wealth or authority. It's a story about integrity, resilience, and moral courage. It invites you to imagine yourself in Danielle's shoes, to feel the tension, the doubt, the determination that rises in moments when right and wrong collide. Join us as we follow her journey of injustice, courage, and transformation. Hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And let's explore together how one person's choice can spark change for everyone. The terminal at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport hummed with its usual morning rhythm, rolling suitcases, distant announcements, and the faint scent of roasted coffee drifting from a kiosk nearby. At Gate 12A, the boarding line for Aurelia Air Flight 207 to New York moved at a steady pace. Among the travelers stood Danielle Brooks, a black woman in her early 40s. She wore jeans, white sneakers, and a simple gray sweater. No designer logos, no assistant following behind. To most, she was just another passenger heading east. But hidden behind that calm composure was the CEO of Aurelia Air, the very company operating the flight. Danielle's eyes were tired but sharp. For weeks, she'd read reports of quiet discrimination within her airline passengers, of color-denied upgrades, attendants ignoring complaints, subtle hostility cloaked in policy. She didn't want another report from her PR team. She wanted the truth. Today, she had decided to see it herself. No entourage, no business suit, just her and a ticket she'd bought under her real name. As the gate agent scanned her boarding pass, the small machine chirped a soft beep, and a green light flickered. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Brooks," the agent said with a polite smile. Danielle nodded, grateful for the normalcy. But normalcy didn't last long. The moment she stepped through the airplane door, she noticed the head flight attendant, a tall, blonde woman in a crisp navy uniform, watching her with an expression that hovered between suspicion and disdain. The name tag read Rebecca Hayes. Rebecca stepped forward, her smile practiced but thin. "Good morning, ma'am. May I see your ticket again?" Danielle offered it without hesitation. "Of course." Rebecca glanced at it, then looked up. "First class." Her voice carried the faintest note of disbelief. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Danielle blinked once, steady and unbothered. "Yes, seat 2A." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. Around them, and the soft chatter of first-class passengers dimmed. Even the flight attendant by the beverage cart, Liam Turner, seemed to pause, glancing over with a smirk. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said finally, "but this ticket doesn't look right. It could be a system error." "It scanned fine at the gate," Danielle replied gently. "You can check again." Rebecca sighed through her nose. Then, in a gesture so casual it almost seemed rehearsed, tore the printed ticket neatly in half. The sound was small, just paper ripping, yet it sliced through the air like a scream. Danielle's hands stayed still at her sides. The other passengers froze. A man in a suit looked away. A woman whispered something to her husband. Rebecca folded her arms. "Ma'am, I'm afraid first class is reserved for verified passengers. You'll need to return to economy." For a heartbeat. Danielle said nothing. Inside, something old and familiar pressed against her ribs, the weight of humiliation she'd thought she'd long outgrown. But her face remained calm, her voice even. "Could you please confirm my name in your system?" she asked. Rebecca tilted her head, that faint smile returning. "I think we both know how this ends. Ms. Brooks." Danielle answered quietly. Rebecca's expression flickered recognition, perhaps, or simply annoyance. "I see. Well, Ms. Brooks, you're welcome to wait while we sort it out, but please step aside so real passengers can board." Her words dropped like stones. Danielle took a single step back. The aisle felt smaller now, the overhead lights harsher. Liam whispered something under his breath, followed by a stifled chuckle. A quiet voice behind Danielle murmured, "Unbelievable." But no one moved to help. In her mind, Danielle's thoughts ran cold and precise. So it's true. The arrogance, the blindness, it's not just rumor. She looked up, meeting Rebecca's eyes. "I understand," she said softly. "I'll wait." Rebecca turned away, clearly satisfied, motioning to Liam to handle it. Liam rolled his eyes. "Another upgrade scammer?" he muttered, not quietly enough. Danielle's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Inside, though, her pulse steadied. She'd faced boardroom battles, hostile investors, and public scrutiny, but this was different. This was raw, ugly, personal. As she stood there, holding the torn pieces of her ticket, she realized she wasn't just witnessing discrimination, she was feeling it, like a bruise forming under the skin of her company. The cabin door closed. The captain's voice, calm and authoritative, echoed from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Aurelia Air Flight 207 to New York. Please take your seats. We'll be departing shortly." Danielle didn't move. Rebecca noticed and frowned. "Ma'am, I need you to find your proper seat. Now." Danielle glanced down at the halves of her ticket, then up again. "I intend to," she said quietly, "but I think the proper seat is exactly where I'm standing." A few passengers looked up, then curiosity flickering, sensing something unusual. Rebecca huffed, exasperated. "Fine, security will handle this." She gestured sharply to Liam, who smirked and reached for the intercom. The hum of the cabin grew tense, thick with discomfort. Danielle took a slow breath, feeling the air vibrate in her lungs. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was watching, measuring, waiting. For 5 long seconds, no one spoke. The only sound was the low whine of the air conditioning and the rustle of someone's newspaper. Then, almost to herself, Danielle whispered, "Sometimes silence is the loudest confession." Outside, a ray of morning sunlight struck the aircraft's logo, a golden pair of wings gleaming bright against the metal. The irony was sharp, almost poetic. Inside, justice waited patient, quiet, and unstoppable. The plane had not yet taken off, but the air inside felt heavier than altitude could ever explain. Danielle Brooks stood still in the narrow aisle, the torn halves of her ticket folded carefully between her fingers. Every eye that dared to glance her way did so quickly, as if her presence carried something contagious discomfort or truth. Rebecca Hayes turned away to fuss with the stack of menus. Her voice carried down the cabin with professional calm, but there was a sharpness underneath. "Welcome aboard Aurelia Air Flight 207 to New York. We hope you enjoy our service." Danielle moved toward the first-class cabin. She did not demand. She simply walked, slow and measured, her steps making almost no sound on the carpet. The other passengers tracked her in silence. Some whispered. One man in a pinstripe suit muttered, "What's her problem?" His wife nudged him to stop. At row 2, Danielle paused beside seat 2A. The leather shone under the overhead light. It was empty, waiting. She placed the torn ticket gently on an armrest, as if claiming what was rightfully hers. Her voice was calm. "I'll stay here until this is resolved." Rebecca turned, her face tightening. "Ma'am, I already explained. First class is for confirmed passengers only. I am confirmed. Not in my system." Danielle studied her for a long moment. There was no anger in her eyes, only exhaustion, the kind born from years of seeing the same pattern painted in new shades. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it's your system that's broken." Rebecca didn't answer. She only gave a short, hard laugh and moved away, leaving Danielle standing alone at the edge of luxury she herself had built. Outside, the late morning light streamed through the oval windows. The sky was a watercolor of pale blue and streaks of white cloud, deceptively peaceful. Inside, the hum of tension deepened. In row 3, a younger flight attendant, Nora Bennett, adjusted the overhead compartment. Her movements were brisk, nervous. She'd only been with Aurelia Air for 2 months, still learning, still memorizing every protocol. But as she watched Rebecca speak to Danielle, something inside her stirred. She remembered the orientation video that played during training smiling employees of all colors and backgrounds, talking about Aurelia Air's commitment to equality. She'd believed every word. Now, watching her supervisor tear a woman's dignity in half with a smile, that belief cracked. Rebecca leaned close to Liam Turner near the galley. "Can you call the captain? We may need him before takeoff." Liam smirked. "All this over a wrong seat." "She's not supposed to be here," Rebecca hissed. "Just do it." Nora heard the words. Her pulse picked up. She should stay quiet. Rookies didn't question seniors. But the memory of the ticket being ripped replayed in her head like a slow movie, and something about it wouldn't let her rest. She approached Danielle cautiously. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said in a low voice. "I just wanted to say, I saw your ticket scan green at the gate. It looked valid." Danielle looked up, meeting the young woman's anxious eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "What's your name, Nora?" "That's a good name," Danielle murmured. "Means light, doesn't it?" Nora nodded, surprised she knew. I think so." Before she could say more, Rebecca's voice cut through the cabin. "Nora, over here, please." The younger woman flinched, glancing at Danielle apologetically before hurrying back. Rebecca's tone was sugar over steel. "I told you to prep the safety demo, not chat with passengers. I was just... Don't just me, sweetheart. You're here to learn, not to question." Liam snorted. Maybe she wants to trade seats with our little troublemaker. Rebecca shot him a warning glance, but a smirk tugged at her mouth anyway. Maybe. Nora bit her lip, eyes darting toward Danielle. The woman was sitting quietly now, hands folded, gaze steady on the front of the cabin. There was something regal about her stillness, like someone who didn't need to raise her voice to command a room. For a brief moment, Nora wondered who she really was. Down the aisle, a passenger shifted uncomfortably. A young mother whispered to her child to stay quiet. The hum of judgment, fear, and curiosity wrapped the cabin like static. Rebecca walked briskly to the intercom, pressing a button. "Captain Fields, we have a seating issue in first class. I need your approval to have a passenger relocated." A voice crackled back through the speaker. Deep, clipped, professional. "Handle it quickly. Hayes, we're already behind schedule." Rebecca smiled thinly. Satisfied. "You heard the captain. Please move to coach, ma'am." Danielle tilted her head. "Would you like to call me by name, or just ma'am?" Rebecca blinked, caught off guard. "What difference does it make? Names are where respect begins," Danielle replied. Her tone was soft, but something about it landed with weight. Rebecca looked away first. "Security's on the way," she muttered. At the rear of the plane, Nora's chest tightened. She wanted to speak again, to say, "This isn't right," but fear held her tongue. She thought of her rent, her probationary period, the warning HR had given during orientation. Don't cause disruptions during boarding, ever. Still, a part of her whispered, if no one speaks, nothing changes. In seat 4B, a passenger named Linda Park tapped on her phone, pretending to text but secretly recording a short video. She was a social issues blogger from San Francisco, traveling home after a conference on workplace equity. The scene unfolding in front of her lens was something she'd seen too many times, in too many places. She caught Danielle's expression calm, wounded, dignified, and felt her chest tighten. Beside her, Jack Miller, a marketing executive, leaned over. "Are you recording?" Linda nodded slightly. This might matter later. Jack exhaled. "Crazy world," he said, but didn't stop her. Rebecca returned to Danielle once more. "Ma'am, I don't want to repeat myself." Danielle's gaze didn't waver, and "I don't want to repeat history." The words made Rebecca hesitate just a fraction, but she recovered quickly. "Fine. Officers coming." From the front door, a uniformed figure appeared. Officer Carla Monroe, Latina, broad-shouldered, efficient. She looked between the two women, instantly reading the tension in the air. "What's the issue here?" she asked. Rebecca spoke first. "This passenger is refusing to move from first class. Her ticket doesn't match the manifest." Carla turned to Danielle. "Ma'am, do you have ID?" Danielle handed it over silently. Carla studied it, frowning slightly. "It says you're Danielle Brooks." "Yes." Carla's brow furrowed, as though the name tugged at a faint memory. "And you're flying with Aurelia Air." Danielle nodded once. Rebecca interjected. "The problem is she bought an economy ticket and somehow I did not." Danielle said, calm as still water, "Check again." Carla moved toward the small device by the galley, scanning the barcode from the torn ticket pieces. The machine blinked red. Rebecca crossed her arms, triumphant. "See, invalid." Danielle's eyes softened, almost pitying. Technology only tells the truth if humans let it. The phrase hung in the air, unsettling. Carla exhaled. "Ma'am, maybe you should step out for a minute while we figure this out?" Danielle nodded slowly, as if deciding something private. "All right," she said. Then, pulling a sleek phone from her bag, she added, "But before I leave, I need to make one quick call." Rebecca's hand shot out. "No phones during boarding." Danielle looked at her gently. "Some calls can't wait." She dialed. One ring, two. A woman's voice answered, steady, professional, "Ms. Brooks, this is Evelyn Ross. Are you safe?" Rebecca froze. The name Evelyn Ross was familiar. She'd seen it in internal memos under the CEO's communications. Danielle spoke softly into the phone. "Yes, Evelyn. I'm fine. I'm on flight 207, but I think we found the problem." "What kind of problem? The kind that starts with ignorance and ends with consequences?" Rebecca's stomach dropped. "Wait." What Danielle ended the call, slipped the phone back into her bag, and looked around. The cabin was utterly silent. Even Liam had stopped smirking. Danielle rose fully to her height. "Officer, if you'd like to verify my identity, I'll save you the trouble. I'm Danielle Brooks, CEO of Aurelia Air." The words rolled through the cabin like thunder muffled by luxury leather. For a moment, no one breathed. Rebecca's lips parted, but no sound came. Liam blinked rapidly. Carla's mouth tightened. She looked at the ID again, then at Danielle's composed face. "From seat 4B, Linda whispered. "Oh my God," and hit record again. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I came here quietly to understand what passengers experience when they don't fit your expectations. Now, I understand." Her gaze swept the cabin, soft but piercing. "Continue the flight. I'll take my seat." Rebecca stammered. I didn't know that's exactly the problem," Danielle replied. She turned toward Nora, who stood frozen near the galley. "Thank you, Nora, for telling the truth. That takes courage." Nora's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I don't apologize for integrity," Danielle said gently. "Protect it." The young woman swallowed hard, nodding. Carla stepped aside silently, almost in respect. Rebecca lowered her head, words failing her. Liam busied himself with a tray, hands trembling. Danielle took her seat in 2A, smooth and deliberate, as if the world had simply corrected itself. The engines hummed to life. The air felt different, lighter, but charged, as though justice itself was taking its first breath. From behind, Linda whispered to Jack, "This story isn't over." Danielle leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. Inside her chest, her heartbeat was steady again. The ache of humiliation was still there, but beneath it burned something stronger: purpose. For years, she told herself discrimination within her airline was isolated, exaggerated by rumor. Now she knew better, and knowing meant responsibility. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Rebecca's voice, shaky now, came over the speaker for the safety briefing. The confidence was gone. The script stumbled. Danielle opened her eyes and looked out the window as the horizon tilted gently upward. The clouds ahead glowed with morning light, endless and unjudging. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own calm face and thought, "They tried to take my seat, but they gave me something greater proof." She smiled faintly. Justice, like the sky, always waited above the noise. The engines rumbled softly beneath the cabin floor, a vibration that crept through the soles of shoes and into the silence that had fallen after the revelation. No one spoke. It was as if every passenger had become an unwilling witness to a moral earthquake. Rebecca Hayes stood by the galley, her hands still trembling around a folded napkin. The crisp professionalism that had once wrapped her like armor now felt paper-thin. She avoided looking at seat 2A, where Danielle Brooks sat quietly, gazing out the window. Danielle wasn't gloating. Her face was unreadable, calm, almost serene. But beneath that calm there was a depth of reflection that seemed to hum with quiet electricity. She could still feel the echo of humiliation in her chest. Yet what she felt more strongly was responsibility. She had seen it all now, the subtle cruelty, the misuse of authority, and she couldn't pretend it was isolated anymore. It lived inside the culture of the company she had built. Nora Bennett, still by the aisle, pretended to check the seat belts in row 3, though her eyes kept flicking toward Danielle. The young attendant's stomach twisted. She had done what she thought was right, but now that she knew who the woman truly was, fear and awe tangled together inside her. Would the CEO remember her? Would she lose her job for stepping into the chaos? Rebecca finally found her voice. "Liam," she said quietly, "we still have to finish service prep. Let's move." Liam Turner nodded stiffly, his earlier arrogance gone. "Yes, ma'am." He gathered silver trays, avoiding everyone's gaze. He could feel eyes on his back, judgment, maybe pity. At the far end, Officer Carla Monroe spoke softly into her radio. Situation contained, passenger verified. Returning to terminal security post, once cleared for takeoff. Her tone was professional, but her heart beat faster than she liked. She'd nearly forced the CEO of a major airline off her own plane. The thought made her chest tighten. As the plane lifted from the runway, the cabin tilted gently, pressing passengers into their seats. The city of Seattle disappeared beneath clouds, leaving only bright white and endless blue. Rebecca began the safety demonstration automatically, her voice mechanical. "In case of an emergency, please locate the nearest exit." Her words stumbled. She cleared her throat and started again. Liam avoided looking at her. Nora did most of the work silently, distributing headsets and adjusting seatbelts. When the announcement ended, Rebecca walked down the aisle toward Danielle, her steps hesitant. "Ms. Brooks," she began, her voice low, "I want to apologize. I didn't know who you were." Danielle turned her head slowly, meeting her eyes. "That's exactly the point. Isn't it?" Rebecca's lips parted, but no reply came. Danielle's tone wasn't angry, yet each word carried the weight of truth. "If you had known, you would have treated me differently. That's not respect, that's hierarchy." Rebecca swallowed hard. "I never meant intention doesn't erase impact." Danielle interrupted gently. "Remember that." She turned back to the window. "You have a long flight ahead. Make it meaningful." Rebecca stood still for a few seconds, unsure what to do with the sudden mirror held up to her face. For years she had measured worth in polished shoes and expensive suits, assuming her instincts were fair. Now she saw how easily judgment had become habit. She returned to the galley, numb, from row 4. Linda Park glanced up from her phone. Her post from the gate had already gone viral, over 50,000 views in half an hour. She hadn't mentioned names, only the phrase "black woman humiliated in first class." But the internet didn't need much. The hashtag Aurelia Flight 207 had already begun to trend. She looked toward Danielle's calm figure and wondered what it must feel like to be both victim and leader in the same breath. Jack Miller leaned closer. "You think she'll fire them all?" Linda exhaled softly. "I think she's thinking about more than that." 2 hours into the flight, the clouds thickened outside, shading the cabin in silver light. The scent of reheated meals drifted through the air. Rebecca tried to serve with composure, but her hands shook each time she passed Danielle's row. When she accidentally brushed Danielle's arm with a tray, she whispered a trembling, "Sorry." Danielle nodded slightly without looking up. "Be careful with the coffee," she said softly. It burns. The words sounded ordinary, but Rebecca heard the double meaning. At the rear galley, Liam leaned against the counter. She's not saying much. Maybe she's letting it go. Rebecca shook her head. People like her don't just let it go. What does that mean? It means she's watching everything. Nora set a tray beside them, her hand steadier now. Maybe she's watching to see who learns from it. Rebecca looked at her sharply, then sighed. You think you're brave, don't you? Nora didn't answer. Courage didn't feel like bravery. It felt like shaken knees that refused to buckle. As the flight settled into its quiet rhythm, Danielle closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered her first months at the airline decades ago, when she was just a flight attendant with a dream bigger than the uniform she wore. Back then, she'd faced the same dismissive looks, the same quiet prejudices always hidden behind smiles and politeness. She'd promised herself that when she reached leadership, she would build an airline where dignity flew higher than rank. Somewhere along the climb, bureaucracy had dulled that vision. Now, sitting in 2A with torn paper still folded in her pocket, she realized how far the company had drifted from its ideals. The captain's voice broke her thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Fields from the flight deck. We'll be experiencing light turbulence shortly. Please remain seated. The seatbelt signs blinked on. The plane shuddered gently as it cut through a thin cloud layer. Rebecca steadied herself with a hand on the seat back. Nora moved quickly, checking passengers' belts. When she reached Danielle, the older woman smiled faintly. Thank you. Nora, you're doing your job well. Nora blushed, just trying to help. Ma'am. Danielle's gaze softened. Keep that honesty. The company will need it. In the galley, Liam whispered to Rebecca. She's talking to the rookie now, probably grooming her for some PR stunt. Rebecca shot him a look. Don't dig deeper. You've done enough damage. He shrugged, pretending indifference, though guilt gnawed at his stomach. The turbulence eased. Rebecca took a slow breath and decided to face the humiliation directly. She retrieved her service log and began typing an internal report, detailing the miscommunication. The words looked wrong on the screen. Miscommunication wasn't the right word for what she'd done. She closed the tablet, unable to justify it. Hours passed. The cabin dimmed as the crew lowered the lights for rest. Most passengers slipped into quiet sleep, but Danielle remained awake, her mind turning. She drafted a short email to Evelyn Ross, asking for access to personnel files related to in-flight complaints. Then she deleted the draft. She wanted to confront the truth face to face, not through data. The silence of cruising altitude felt like a confession booth. Every breath in the cabin carried unspoken thoughts. Shame, fear, admiration. Near midnight over the Rockies, Nora approached Danielle with a cup of water. Would you like anything else? Ms. Brooks. Danielle shook her head gently. Just your honesty, if you can spare it. Nora hesitated. Can I ask something? Of course. Why didn't you tell her who you were sooner? It would have stopped everything. Danielle looked out the window. Far below, lightning flashed among distant clouds, because if I had, she'd only change her behavior, not her heart. Nora absorbed that quietly. You think she can change, I hope so, Danielle said, but hope works better when it's uncomfortable. From the front. Rebecca watched the two of them talking, an ache rising in her chest. She wanted to apologize again, to say something real this time, but pride and fear tangled together like wires, shocking her into silence. She didn't notice that Linda Park was still awake, typing furiously on her laptop. The blogger's story was taking shape, a narrative of power, prejudice, and unexpected justice. She hesitated before publishing, aware that one post could spark a wildfire. But then she remembered the quiet dignity of the woman in seat 2A, and she hit publish. Within minutes, the post began spreading through news networks, picked up by hashtags and retweets. Aurelia Flight 207, Danielle Brooks, Justice in the Sky. Rebecca's cabin phone buzzed softly. She picked it up. A voice from operations whispered, "Hayes, what the hell's going on up there? We're getting calls from PR. Is it true the CEO's on your flight?" Rebecca's stomach dropped. "Yes," she whispered. "Do not speak to media when you land. The board's convening. That's an order." She hung up, her face pale. The hum of the engines felt louder now, pressing against her thoughts. She leaned against the wall, whispering to herself, "How did it come to this at that same moment?" Danielle glanced at the folded ticket again. The edges were frayed from her fingers. To her, it wasn't just paper anymore, it was evidence, a reminder, a symbol of how fragile respect could be when left unguarded. As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, the captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into New York shortly." The cabin lights brightened slowly, revealing weary faces and uneasy smiles. Rebecca walked the aisle one last time, forcing professionalism into each word. "We'll be landing in about 20 minutes. Please ensure your seats are upright." When she reached Danielle's row, she stopped. "Ms. Brooks," she began quietly, "whatever happens after this, I am truly sorry." Danielle met her gaze. "Then make sure it means something. Sorry isn't a period, it's a beginning." Rebecca nodded, tears stinging her eyes. She turned away before anyone could see. Outside the window, the Atlantic shimmered under the rising sun. The city waited ahead, unaware that within this metal tube above the clouds, a storm of a different kind was already forming. Danielle looked at her reflection one last time before landing. Calm, steady, resolute, the first wound had been opened not to destroy, but to heal through exposure. And deep down, she knew the real turbulence was yet to come. The wheels touched down at John F. Kennedy Airport with a low, trembling roar. The cabin jolted slightly as the plane slowed across the runway, and a ripple of breath moved through the passengers' half relief, half the lingering unease of what they had witnessed. The sun had already climbed high, spilling golden light through the windows and washing the metal cabin in soft warmth. But that light could not erase the tension that clung to everyone like static. Danielle Brooks opened her eyes as the plane slowed toward the gate. She had not slept, not even for a minute. Her mind had been awake the entire flight, tracing every detail, every expression, every silence. She thought of the system she had built, one meant to be inclusive, fair, visionary, and realized it had betrayed its promise in the smallest yet deepest way. Across the aisle, Nora Bennett gathered the remaining cups from the meal service. Her fingers trembled slightly. Since the moment she had spoken up, her mind had been in turmoil. She kept asking herself whether she had done the right thing. When the CEO herself thanked her, Nora had felt a rush of pride, quickly followed by fear. A part of her knew that courage always came at a cost. Rebecca Hayes, standing at the front near the cockpit door, looked pale and hollow. Her smile, once bright and automatic, was gone. Every announcement felt like a confession. She'd spent the last 2 hours replaying the scene over and over, the sound of paper tearing, the look in Danielle's eyes, the way silence had turned judgment into spectacle. She wasn't sure which hurt more, the public humiliation or the sudden realization that she had become the very kind of person she once despised. As the plane rolled to a stop, the passengers began unbuckling their belts. Phones buzzed in pockets, catching up to ground signals on half a dozen screens. Notifications flashed the same words: Aurelia Air Flight 207. Rebecca turned as the intercom chimed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York City. Local time is 10:27. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign has been turned off. The familiar routine rang hollow now, every word echoing in the heavy quiet. Danielle stayed still. She knew the moment they opened that door, the world outside would be waiting with questions, cameras, and consequences. She didn't fear exposure. She feared what it would reveal about more than just her crew. Liam Turner whispered to Rebecca, "Media's probably waiting already. We're dead." Rebecca shot him a sharp look. "Don't talk." He shrugged, trying to hide his panic. "I was just doing what you said." She closed her eyes briefly. That's not an excuse anymore. When the chime sounded again, passengers rose. Nora moved quickly to the front, her training kicking in. "Thank you for flying Aurelia Air," she said softly, voice quivering but kind. "We appreciate your patience." A few passengers gave small nods, others looked away, unsure how to behave. Linda Park, the blogger, lingered in her seat for a moment, watching the scene. Her post had crossed 100,000 views now. She wasn't sure whether to feel proud or guilty. She looked at Danielle and whispered under her breath, "Do something good with it." Danielle heard, but didn't respond. At the jet bridge, Officer Carla Monroe waited again, flanked by two airport supervisors. She looked calmer now, but her eyes betrayed a quiet worry. When Danielle stepped into view, Carla straightened. "Ms. Brooks, welcome back to New York." "Thank you." "Officer Monroe," Danielle replied evenly. "I'd like to speak privately before my staff disembarks." Carla nodded, gesturing toward a small office near the gate. Danielle entered first, her steps deliberate, her posture straight. Inside the narrow room, she turned to face Rebecca, Liam, and Nora, who followed reluctantly. Carla closed the door behind them, sealing out the noise of arriving passengers. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air buzzed faintly with the hum of overhead lights. Then Danielle said quietly, "You can relax. I'm not here to shout. I just want the truth." Rebecca swallowed. "I already told you. Ms. Brooks, it was a mistake. I misread the ticket stop." Danielle's voice was calm, but firm enough to freeze every movement. "We both know this wasn't about a ticket. This was about perception." Liam shifted uneasily. "I just followed orders." "Orders are easy to follow when they protect your comfort," Danielle said, turning toward him. "But leadership, real leadership, starts when you question what those orders mean." He looked down at his shoes. Danielle's gaze softened slightly as she turned to Nora. "You spoke up when it mattered. I want to thank you for that." Nora's throat tightened. "I didn't do much. I just couldn't stay quiet. That's what makes it much," Danielle said. "Silence is what keeps systems broken." Rebecca finally looked up, her voice barely audible. "You're right. I was wrong. I've been flying for 12 years. I've seen 1,000 passengers, and somewhere along the way, I started assuming who belonged where. I don't even know when it happened." Danielle studied her for a moment, then said, "You know now? That's the beginning." The room went still again. The hum of the airport beyond the walls felt distant. Carla cleared her throat. "Ms. Brooks, PR has requested your presence. There's a crowd outside. They know." Danielle exhaled slowly. "Of course they do." She turned to her staff. "We'll talk again soon. Not as punishment, but as part of something bigger." Rebecca frowned. "What do you mean you'll find out?" Danielle said quietly. When she stepped out of the office, flashes erupted like lightning. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted her name. "Ms. Brooks. Is it true you were denied your seat? Is the flight crew being fired?" Danielle raised a hand. Calm as ever. "I'll make a statement soon. For now, please remember no one learns when you turn every mistake into entertainment." The crowd quieted, surprised by the softness in her tone. She walked away with Officer Monroe beside her, leaving the noise behind. Hours later, in her office overlooking Midtown Manhattan, Danielle sat at her desk with Evelyn Ross on video call. The walls were lined with framed photographs of early flights, smiling employees, and a bronze plaque that read, "Integrity Takes Flight." Evelyn's voice crackled through the screen. "The board wants an emergency meeting tonight. They're worried about the fallout. Every news channel's running it." "I expected that," Danielle said. She sipped her coffee, eyes distant. "But this isn't about image. It's about reflection." Evelyn hesitated. "You're not planning to fire them immediately." "No," Danielle said. "Firing them fixes nothing. The disease is deeper than 3 people. I want a full audit of in-flight conduct reports, past 3 years, every incident involving bias, complaints, customer escalation. I want to see patterns." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's going to be a lot of data. Then it'll tell us a lot of truth." Downstairs, at the crew lounge, Rebecca sat alone, head in her hands. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from coworkers, messages from the union, a notification from her husband. "Are you okay?" She didn't know how to answer. She kept seeing Danielle's calm face, hearing her words, "You'll find out." Nora entered quietly, still in uniform. She hesitated before sitting across from her. "They told me to wait for an HR meeting." Rebecca gave a humorless laugh. "Yeah, welcome to aviation politics." Nora looked down. "I'm sorry for what happened." Rebecca shook her head. "Don't be. You were right." The 2 women sat in silence, the weight of consequences pressing down on them. Later that evening, a company-wide email appeared in every employee inbox. Subject line, "Aurelia Air Commitment to Change." It was signed by Danielle Brooks herself. It read, "Respect isn't policy. It's practice. Starting today, we'll begin internal reviews, open dialogues, and training that go beyond checklists. I believe in accountability, not just punishment. For those willing to change, there will be room to grow. For those unwilling, there will be consequences. Let's rebuild what flight should mean freedom for everyone on board." The email spread across social media within minutes. Many praised her tone. Others criticized it as too lenient. But the passengers who'd been on Flight 207 knew better. They had seen the truth unfold up close. That night, Nora received a message from an unknown number. "This is Danielle. You showed courage today. Don't lose it." Her breath caught as she stared at the text. She didn't know how the CEO got her number, but she smiled for the first time that day. Rebecca also received a message, but hers was from HR report to headquarters tomorrow at 9 a.m. for an internal review. She exhaled shakily, knowing her reckoning had arrived. Meanwhile, Linda Park sat in her Brooklyn apartment, watching her post explode with thousands of comments, some angry, some inspired. She wrote a follow-up piece titled "When the Sky Speaks Truth," focusing not on outrage but on introspection. Maybe justice doesn't always roar. She wrote, "Sometimes it lands quietly, like a plane after a storm, and miles above the city. Another Aurelia airplane glided through the night sky, its logo shining faintly under moonlight, a reminder of both failure and possibility." In her office, Danielle looked out at the skyline, lights flickering like stars trapped in glass. She felt the exhaustion seep into her bones, but beneath it was a quiet certainty. The company she loved could be broken open and rebuilt, piece by piece, if she had the courage to stay patient. The world outside her window was vast and loud, but inside the silence of her thoughts, one truth remained clear: respect, like flight, only worked when everyone lifted together. The phone on her desk buzzed again. Evelyn's voice came through the speaker. "Danielle, the board is ready for you." Danielle stood, straightened her jacket, and whispered to herself, "Let's finish what they started." She walked out of her office into the light of the corridor, her reflection catching briefly in the glass door a woman steady, unyielding, and unafraid to face the next storm. And somewhere, deep in her chest, the voice of courage that had begun in a trembling young attendant now echoed inside her too. The boardroom at Aurelia Air headquarters overlooked the New York skyline, a sharp horizon of glass and steel glittering under the evening light. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation, the kind that comes before either transformation or collapse. A long table stretched across the room, polished to a mirror sheen, surrounded by 12 board members. At the head sat Harold Green, chairman of the board, his expression unreadable. To his right, Evelyn Ross watched the doorway, waiting. The door opened, and Danielle Brooks walked in. She was calm, composed, dressed in a simple dark suit. The murmurs quieted. She took her seat without a word. Harold leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Danielle, the footage is everywhere. News networks, social media, late-night shows. You've become the story." "I noticed," Danielle replied evenly. "But I'm not what matters here." One of the older members, Gerald Whitman, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, the company's reputation does. We're losing millions in stock value by the hour. We need a response swift, firm, and visible." "You mean scapegoats," Danielle said. Her tone wasn't angry, just precise. Gerald frowned. "I mean discipline. Fire the crew. Make a statement. Move on before this turns into a PR disaster." Danielle's gaze was steady. "It already is a disaster. Gerald, the only question is whether we treat it as a symptom or a mirror." A soft tension rippled across the table. Evelyn suppressed a small smile of admiration. Danielle's calm was its own weapon. Another board member, Susan Palmer, adjusted her glasses. "Danielle, we all support the values you stand for, but the market doesn't run on values. It runs on confidence. People want assurance that leadership is decisive." "Decisive," Danielle repeated quietly. "Yes, but I won't mistake speed for strength." She turned slightly toward Evelyn. "How many verified reports of discrimination have we had in the past year?" Evelyn tapped her tablet. 73 formal, 116 informal through the anonymous system. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Danielle continued, her voice calm but unwavering. Those aren't numbers. Those are experiences. My flight simply made them visible. Harold leaned back, studying her. You intend to make this about the company culture. I intend, Danielle said, to make sure we earn the right to exist. Silence followed, thick and tense. Gerald exhaled sharply. You're emotional? Danielle, you're too close to this. Danielle's eyes met his, steady as stone. I lived through it. That doesn't make me emotional. It makes me qualified. Evelyn placed a hand over her notes. Danielle's proposing an internal reform plan. It's already drafted training, audits, a new diversity council with external oversight. Susan sighed. Reform takes time. The public wants action now. They'll get action. Danielle said, just not the kind that sacrifices truth for convenience. She pressed a button on her laptop, projecting an image onto the screen, a still frame from Linda Park's viral video. The moment Rebecca tore the ticket, gasps echoed around the table. This, Danielle said softly, is what we sold to the world as customer care. A woman tearing a stranger's dignity in half. If we fix the image but not the mindset, we'll be right back here next year. The room stayed quiet. Then Harold asked the question everyone avoided. Are you protecting them? Danielle. The crew. I'm protecting the principle that punishment without understanding only breeds silence. And silence is what caused this in the first place. Harold drummed his fingers. You're risking your position. I know, she said simply. At that moment, the door opened. A communications director stepped in, holding a phone. Ms. Brooks, CNN is requesting a live statement within the hour. They're asking if you'll appear. Danielle nodded. Set it up, Gerald muttered. You're going to make this worse. Danielle stood, or better. We'll find out soon enough. The boardroom buzzed after she left. Evelyn gathered her papers, following quietly. Outside the conference room, the hallway was lined with staff pretending not to stare. Some offered nervous smiles, others avoided eye contact. Danielle walked past them with the same steady pace she'd held all day. But inside, her mind spun through the 1,000 possibilities waiting on the other side of that camera. In the media suite downstairs, technicians prepared the set lights, microphone, Aurelia Air backdrop. A producer handed Danielle a small earpiece. 5 minutes, Ms. Brooks. Evelyn stood beside her, whispering, You could still delay this. Let PR craft the message. Danielle shook her head. They'd turn it into theater. This needs truth. When the countdown began, she inhaled deeply, her pulse slow and deliberate. She remembered the silence of that plane cabin, the torn paper, the whispers, the shame, and she knew what she needed to say. The red light blinked on. Good evening, she began, her voice calm, steady, human. Many of you have seen the video from Flight 207. I was the passenger in that clip. I was also the CEO of the airline operating that flight. She paused just long enough to let that sink in. What happened on that plane is not an isolated mistake. It's a reflection of biases we think we've outgrown, of systems we think are fair because they wear polite faces. It happened to me, but it could happen to anyone who doesn't look like what some people expect to see in first class. She leaned slightly forward, her tone softening. I'm not here to shame individuals. I'm here to rebuild a standard. Every company talks about inclusion, but few are willing to look in the mirror when the reflection hurts. I'm looking. So is Aurelia Air, and we won't look away. In homes across the country, people watched in silence. Some nodded, some cried, others simply listened. Perhaps for the first time, without defense. Danielle continued. The crew involved will be suspended pending review, not to erase them, but to teach them. This isn't about firing a few people. It's about firing a mindset. And that takes more than outrage, it takes commitment. When the broadcast ended, the studio was silent. Then the producer whispered, "That was extraordinary." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on Danielle's shoulder. "You just turned a scandal into a lesson." "Let's hope they learn it," Danielle murmured. Outside the building, the night had turned electric. Reporters clustered near the entrance, lights flashing. Security formed a line as Danielle stepped into the open air. The questions came like a storm. "Ms. Brooks, are you resigning? Will you compensate passengers? Is the airline racist?" Danielle stopped briefly, facing them. Racism isn't a label, it's a behavior, and behavior can change. That's what I'm working on. Then she walked past, leaving the cameras behind, across the city, in a modest apartment. Nora Bennett sat on her couch, watching the broadcast replay. Her eyes glistened as she heard Danielle say the words, "Teach, not erase." She felt seen, understood. For the first time, she believed that maybe integrity could survive inside a corporation. Meanwhile, Rebecca Hayes sat alone in a hotel room, the television flickering across her pale face. When Danielle's voice said firing a mindset, Rebecca covered her mouth and began to cry, not for her job, but for the version of herself she'd become without realizing it. She picked up her phone and typed a message, "Ms. Brooks, I want to make things right. I'm ready to face whatever comes." She didn't expect a reply, but sending it felt like exhaling after a long-held breath. Danielle's phone buzzed hours later. She read the message and smiled faintly. Then she replied with 3 words, "Meet me tomorrow." The following morning, the board reconvened. The stock had stabilized slightly. Public opinion was shifting from outrage to respect. Even Gerald seemed more subdued. Harold greeted Danielle with a small nod. "Your address worked. We're not drowning anymore." "We were never drowning," Danielle said. "We were learning how to swim." Evelyn handed her a folder. HR's report came in. Rebecca Hayes requested a meeting. So did Nora Bennett. "Good," Danielle said. "I'll see them both." Harold hesitated. "You're really going to keep them. I'm going to teach them," Danielle said. "That's harder." Later that day, in her office, Danielle met Rebecca and Nora together. Rebecca's eyes were red, Nora's cautious. The contrast between them, one broken by guilt, the other strengthened by conscience, was striking. Danielle gestured for them to sit. "You both represent this company's future. One of you made a mistake, the other made a choice. But both have something to teach me about what's missing in our culture." Rebecca's voice trembled. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I'm not offering forgiveness," Danielle said softly. "I'm offering responsibility." Rebecca nodded slowly, tears threatening again. "I'll take it." Danielle turned to Nora. "And you remind me of who I used to be, before titles, before layers of comfort dulled my awareness. You saw something wrong and spoke up. That's the leadership I want in every aisle of every plane." Nora blinked, overwhelmed. "Thank you. "Ma'am," Danielle smiled faintly. "Don't thank me. Prove me right." When they left her office, Evelyn entered. "You think they'll rise to it?" Danielle looked toward the window, where sunlight gleamed across the wings of a departing Aurelia Air jet. "We all rise eventually," she said. "Some just need turbulence to remind them they can." Outside, the engines roared as the plane climbed into the bright sky, carrying a company and a lesson that refused to stay grounded. The world would remember Flight 207 not as a story of humiliation, but as the day silence lost and courage spoke instead. And, for the first time in years, Danielle allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the sky was big enough for justice to fly too. Morning broke over New York like a flashbulb. The city pulsed with noise cars, headlines, and the constant hum of screens. On every major network, the same story played in loops: the CEO who was denied her own seat. Footage from Flight 207 had exploded across the internet overnight, edited into montages, dissected by commentators, turned into think pieces and hashtags. Some called Danielle Brooks a hero for confronting systemic bias with grace. Others accused her of orchestrating the event for publicity. In a world of endless opinions, truth had become a storm, and she was standing in the center of it. In the quiet of her office, Danielle watched one of the morning shows play the clip again. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the room. The host's voice followed. Dramatic and eager, Aurelia Air's CEO humiliated in first class. Was it racism or a misunderstanding blown out of proportion? Danielle muted the television. The question wasn't new. It never was. For years, she'd lived in a world that questioned every injustice as if doubt could make it smaller. Evelyn Ross entered, holding 2 coffees. "You've been up all night again, haven't you?" she asked softly, placing one cup on the desk. Danielle gave a small smile. "The internet doesn't sleep. Seems I can't either." Evelyn hesitated. "They're calling for statements from the crew. Reporters are camped outside Rebecca's apartment. Nora's trending on social media. People are calling her the bravest flight attendant in America." Danielle leaned back, folding her arms. And Rebecca, being devoured. She deleted all her accounts. There's a petition to have her banned from aviation. Danielle sighed. "We wanted awareness, not vengeance. That's the problem with viral justice," Evelyn said. "It burns too hot." Danielle turned toward the window. The skyline gleamed beneath the morning sun. 1,000 windows reflecting light like truth, reflecting truth bright, uncomfortable, impossible to contain. "Set a press briefing for noon," she said. "We're not running from this." Evelyn nodded. "I'll notify communications. Do you want Rebecca or Nora to attend?" Danielle thought for a moment. "Both, but separately." Across town, Nora Bennett sat at her small kitchen table, still in her uniform from the day before. The TV flickered with endless coverage: her face, her name, strangers calling her brave. But inside, she didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. Every ping from her phone brought another message, some thanking her, others accusing her of lying to get attention. She scrolled past insults, then stopped on one message from an unknown number. "Courage isn't loud. It's steady. Don't lose yours." She knew instantly who had sent it: Danielle. Nora closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. Somewhere deep down, she felt a strength she hadn't known before, fragile, but growing. Meanwhile, in a dark hotel room, Rebecca Hayes sat on the floor, laptop open. Every headline was a blade. Flight attendant tears ticket, tears down career, a lesson in prejudice at 30,000 feet. She couldn't escape herself. Each replay of the video was another wound, another reminder that a lifetime of professionalism could collapse in 10 seconds of arrogance. A knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find a courier with an envelope. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting. "Meet me at headquarters at 11. We need to talk. D.B." Rebecca's heart thudded. She almost tore it up, afraid it was a trap. But something inside whispered that facing Danielle was the only way forward. At 11 sharp, Rebecca arrived at Aurelia Air headquarters. Security guided her to a small conference room where Danielle waited, alone. Rebecca hesitated at the door, the weight of shame pressing on her shoulders. Danielle gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit, Rebecca." Rebecca obeyed quietly. The silence between them felt heavy, but not hostile. Danielle's gaze was steady, neither condemning nor forgiving, just watching. "I wanted to look you in the eye," Danielle began, "because the world out there is judging you without knowing your heart." Rebecca's voice cracked. "And maybe they're right to. I did what they saw." "Yes, you did," Danielle said softly. "But you're not the only one who did something wrong. I built this company, and somewhere along the way, I let its heart drift. You were shaped by that culture. You mirrored what you thought mattered: control, order, authority. I should have noticed sooner." Rebecca looked down. "I don't know what to say." "Then start by listening," Danielle said gently. "Tell me why you tore that ticket." Rebecca hesitated, then whispered, "I saw her saw you, and I thought, you didn't fit the picture. First-class passengers usually look a certain way. I didn't even think about it. I just acted on instinct. That's the worst part. It didn't feel wrong until it was too late." Danielle nodded slowly. "That's how bias works. Quiet, casual, unexamined. It hides under words like procedure." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "What happens to me now?" "That depends on you," Danielle said. "If you want to leave, no one will stop you. But if you want to learn, there's a place in our new program. We're rebuilding training from the inside out, real conversations, not just policy checklists. I need people willing to confront the uncomfortable parts of themselves. Are you willing?" Rebecca's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, whatever it takes." Danielle's expression softened. "Then let's start there." At noon, the press briefing began. Cameras flashed. Journalists filled the small auditorium. Danielle stood at the podium, composed and unhurried. Nora sat quietly in the front row. Rebecca stood in the back, half hidden, hands clasped tight. Danielle began, her voice clear and even. "The past 48 hours have shown us more than a scandal. They've shown us a mirror. At Aurelia Air, we are not immune to the biases that shape our world, but we can choose what to do once we see them." She paused as the crowd stilled. "I want to speak directly to those who have condemned my crew." She continued, "Anger is understandable, but anger without purpose destroys what empathy can heal. I ask that you let this moment teach, not just punish. My team is human. So am I. And we all have work to do." Reporters scribbled furiously, surprised by the tone. It wasn't the defensive script they'd expected. It was disarmingly sincere. "Starting today," Danielle said, "Aurelia Air will partner with independent organizations to audit our training, hiring, and disciplinary systems. We'll open our data publicly every quarter. Accountability will be measurable. Change won't be silent, but it will be steady. Afterward, the room erupted in questions. One reporter shouted, "Ms. Brooks, people are calling this the most graceful corporate response in years. What drives you to be so composed?" Danielle smiled faintly. Composure isn't calmness, it's conviction that outlasts chaos. The briefing ended to a mix of applause and flashes. Nora approached shyly, and Danielle reached out to squeeze her shoulder. "You did well to come," she said. "Courage isn't one act, it's the habit of choosing right when it's easier not to." Rebecca lingered near the doorway, unsure whether she was allowed in this new world forming around Danielle. When their eyes met, Danielle nodded once, the smallest gesture, but it felt like a bridge. By evening, the internet had turned again. Hashtags like "respect in flight" and "encourage over shame" replaced the earlier outrage. People shared Danielle's speech with captions like "finally," "leadership that listens." Even critics admitted her approach had changed the tone of the national conversation. At home, Nora watched the replay with tears in her eyes. Her mother called from Georgia, proud but worried. "You sure you'll be okay at that company, baby?" she asked. Nora smiled. "I think so. Mom, I'm working for someone who means it, in a quieter corner of the city." Rebecca sat on her hotel balcony, watching planes crisscross the night sky. Each light that passed overhead reminded her of her second chance. She wasn't sure she deserved it, but she intended to earn it. Meanwhile, in her apartment, Linda Park wrote her latest article. "When truth goes viral, people either harden or heal," she typed. Danielle Brooks chose to heal, and the world followed. She attached a photograph from the press conference, Danielle standing between Nora and Rebecca, the embodiment of grace meeting accountability. The piece went live within minutes. It spread faster than the first video. By midnight, Aurelia Air's official page was flooded with messages not of outrage, but of reflection. Flight attendants from other airlines wrote that they'd begun their own conversations. Customers pledged to fly with Aurelia again, calling it the airline that owned its humanity. Danielle read the messages quietly from her office. The noise outside had softened. The storm of scandal had begun to fade, replaced by a slower, steadier wind of change. She felt exhaustion sink into her shoulders, but beneath it, a deep calm. The company would not be the same. Neither would she. Evelyn entered, carrying a folder. "You did it," she said softly. "You turned fury into faith." Danielle shook her head. "Not yet. We've only turned the page." Evelyn smiled. "Still, it's one hell of a chapter." Danielle looked out the window at the dark sky, where the faint lights of departing planes shimmered like distant promises. "The truth flew farther than I expected," she said quietly. "Now, we just have to make sure it lands." The next few days unfolded like the calm after an earthquake, deceptively quiet, yet charged with aftershocks waiting beneath the surface. Aurelia Air headquarters was a swirl of reform meetings, policy rewrites, and media requests. Every corridor hummed with speculation. The scandal had slowed, but it hadn't disappeared. It had merely changed shape. And now, beneath the veneer of recovery, something darker began to stir. Danielle Brooks sat in her office, scanning a series of internal audit reports spread across her desk, lines of text, complaint summaries, timestamps, all tiny threads of a larger story. Her brow furrowed as she traced the pattern. Many of the discrimination complaints that had been filed over the past 2 years had mysteriously disappeared from the company's system, quietly marked as resolved. But there were no resolution notes, no follow-ups, no disciplinary records. Someone had buried them. Evelyn Ross entered, tablet in hand, her expression grim. "You're not going to like this," she said softly. Danielle looked up. "Tell me anyway. The data you requested, I ran a comparison against backup logs. A number of entries were deleted manually, same timestamp, same internal ID. The access came from an executive account." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "Whose?" Evelyn hesitated. "Gerald Whitman." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city below. Danielle leaned back in her chair, silent, absorbing the revelation. Gerald, one of her longest-standing board members, had always been loudest in opposing reform. His pushback had seemed ideological, but now it looked personal. "Get at to secure every log before he notices we're on to him," Danielle said finally, "and make sure legal gets a copy." Evelyn nodded. "Already done. But if this goes public, it'll be ugly." Danielle gave a faint smile. Change always is. Meanwhile, across the city, Gerald Whitman sat in a private club, sipping an old-fashioned while reading the financial section of the newspaper. The headlines still bore Danielle's name, but the tone had shifted words like admirable, transformative, rebuild and trust. He scowled. What had started as a minor embarrassment had turned into her moral triumph. Worse, her reforms were gaining traction with investors. A younger executive approached his table nervously. "Mr. Whitman, I heard the CEO's team is digging into old HR records." Gerald gave a cold smile. "Let them dig. They'll find nothing I didn't plant." But deep down, unease flickered. He had built too much on silence and favoritism, the quiet trades of influence that kept the board in his favor. Danielle's new transparency threatened to unravel it all. At headquarters, Nora Bennett finished another round of retraining sessions. The company had started something new, story-sharing workshops where employees could talk about real experiences without fear of reprisal. Nora, once terrified to speak up, now found herself leading discussions. After the session, she received a message from Danielle. "Come to my office at 6 p.m. I need your insight on something." When Nora arrived, Danielle looked up from her screen. "Nora, you remember how you spoke about small injustices being ignored on flights?" "Yes," Nora said carefully. "It's the kind of thing that builds up when passengers are dismissed or when complaints vanish into paperwork." Danielle nodded slowly. "Exactly. I think I found out why they vanish." She slid the audit report toward her. "Take a look at the deletion logs." Nora scanned the lines, her eyes widening. These timestamps. Some of these were during active flights. And look, crew IDs attached to them. Someone was cleaning the records while we were still in the air. Danielle's voice was quiet but firm, which means this wasn't negligence. It was deliberate concealment. Nora swallowed hard. "What are you going to do?" "What I always do," Danielle said. "Face it directly. By the following morning." The tension inside Aurelia Air was palpable. The board had called for an emergency session. Gerald arrived early, smug as ever, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. He had allies, 3 members who owed him favors, and one who despised Danielle's growing influence. But what he didn't know was that Danielle had come prepared. The meeting began in the top-floor boardroom. Harold Green presided, his expression unreadable. We're here to discuss internal data breaches. It seems someone's been tampering with HR records." Gerald adjusted his tie, feigning confusion. "Data breaches. That's concerning. Has IT identified the source?" Danielle's calm voice cut through. "They have." She tapped a button on her tablet. The large screen flickered to life, displaying a trail of login activity. Each deletion was performed by an account belonging to you, Gerald. A murmur spread around the room. Gerald's face tightened, then smoothed into false composure. "That's absurd. Anyone could have accessed it. My assistant." "Your assistant was on vacation during half those timestamps." Danielle interrupted. "We checked flight manifests. The deletions match your logins during board meetings." He laughed dryly. "You're accusing me without evidence." "Not just you," Danielle said softly. She pressed another key. The screen shifted to a different display: emails, encrypted but recovered. You corresponded with an outside firm, suppressing discrimination reports from flight staff. You called them bad optics. Your words. The room fell silent. Gerald's face drained of color. Harold leaned forward slowly. "Is this true?" Gerald stammered. "You can't prove intent. I was protecting the company." Danielle's voice stayed measured. "You were protecting yourself. Every buried complaint made our system complicit. You turned silence into policy." He slammed his hand on the table. "You're destroying this company with your crusade." Danielle rose from her seat. "No, I'm saving it from the rot you built." The stillness afterward was heavy and final. Harold's voice broke it at last. "Mr. Whitman, you're suspended pending a full investigation." Gerald stood abruptly, face flushed. "You'll regret this," he hissed, then stormed out. The door slammed behind him, echoing through the marble hall. After the meeting, Evelyn caught up to Danielle in the corridor. "That was brutal," she said quietly. "Necessary." Danielle replied, "Justice isn't always kind." Later that night, Danielle sat alone in her office, the city lights stretching endlessly below. She replayed the confrontation in her mind. It hadn't been triumph. It had been grief, the kind that comes when truth costs more than expected. For all her calm, she felt the exhaustion settling deep in her bones. The phone buzzed. It was Nora. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up when everyone else would have looked away." Danielle smiled faintly. "Thank you for reminding me why I couldn't." After hanging up, she turned off her lamp and gazed out the window. Across the skyline, planes traced glowing paths through the dark, each one a thread of faith that even in chaos, direction still existed. The following morning, Aurelia Air's official channels released a statement. An internal corruption probe has revealed unethical suppression of staff reports. The board has taken immediate disciplinary action. Our commitment to transparency stands. The press erupted once more, but this time the story wasn't scandal. It was redemption. Rebecca Hayes, now reinstated as part of the Cultural Reform Program, read the announcement while boarding a domestic flight. Passengers recognized her. Some smiled. Others offered quiet nods of support. For the first time since the incident, she smiled back without shame. As the aircraft taxied down the runway, she glanced out the window and whispered, "Let's start over." In her office, miles away, Danielle received a notification. It was a short message from Harold Green. The board voted unanimously. You have full executive control to rebuild. Danielle set her phone down slowly. The weight of it all, every confrontation, every headline, every sleepless night finally seemed to lift. She wasn't finished yet, but she had reclaimed the sky. That evening, she walked through the hangar where maintenance crews worked under bright floodlights. The smell of jet fuel and steel filled the air. She paused beside a massive Aurelia airplane, its polished surface reflecting her face. A young technician passed by and paused, realizing who she was. "Ms. Brooks," he said nervously. "I just wanted to say, we're proud to work for you." She smiled gently. "Then, let's make sure that pride is something we earn every day." When he walked away, she placed her hand against the cool metal of the plane and whispered to herself, "We rise, or we rust." For Danielle Brooks, the reckoning was never about punishment, it was about awakening. And as she watched another aircraft take flight into the night sky, its lights glimmering like a pulse of hope against the darkness, she knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something honest, something earned, something unstoppable. Weeks passed, and the chaos that once surrounded Aurelia Air began to settle into something resembling renewal. The company's buildings no longer hummed with fear or rumor. They buzzed with purpose. Posters reading "Integrity Takes Flight" appeared in employee lounges. HR introduced open forums called listening hours, where anyone from pilots to ground crew could speak directly to management. For the first time in years, the air inside the headquarters felt lighter, though beneath that optimism, everyone knew the real work had only begun. At the center of it all was Danielle Brooks. Her presence had become almost mythic, a calm constant amid the noise of reform. But leadership, she knew, wasn't a title, it was endurance. The days blurred together with meetings, interviews, and policy reviews. Some nights she slept at her desk, the city glowing beneath her window like a restless sea. One morning, Evelyn Ross stepped into her office, coffee in one hand, a printed report in the other. "We've completed the first phase of cultural realignment," she said. 82% employee engagement. That's the highest we've ever recorded." Danielle gave a small smile. "Numbers can't measure honesty, but it's a start." Evelyn hesitated. "There's something else." Gerald Whitman's legal counsel reached out. "He's negotiating to resign quietly in exchange for dropping potential defamation claims." Danielle exhaled, her expression unreadable. "Let him. Silence can't buy integrity, it only rents it," across the building. Nora Bennett led another session of empathy in the air, a new training program Danielle had approved personally, in front of 30 flight attendants. Nora shared her story, what it meant to speak up, what it cost, and why she'd do it again. The room was silent, eyes fixed on her as she said, "The hardest part isn't speaking. It's staying kind after you've been hurt." Afterward, an older flight attendant approached her. "I've worked here 20 years, the woman said softly. "I've seen things I didn't speak about. But after hearing you, maybe it's time I did." Nora smiled, her voice trembling. "Then maybe we're finally getting somewhere." Meanwhile, Rebecca Hayes stood before a classroom of recruits at the company's training center. She wasn't teaching service protocols or flight safety. She was teaching humility. Her lesson began with a story her own. "I used to think professionalism meant control," she said, "but control without compassion becomes cruelty. The day I tore that ticket, I tore more than paper. I tore trust, and rebuilding it has been harder than any flight I've ever worked." The recruits listened, some with tears in their eyes. When she finished, one young man raised his hand. "Ms. Hayes, how do you keep flying after something like that?" She smiled faintly. "Because the sky doesn't judge. It just waits for you to rise again." Danielle watched that session from behind a glass wall. She didn't announce herself, she just listened. When Rebecca finished, their eyes met across the room. Danielle nodded once, a silent approval. Later that evening, Danielle hosted a town hall for all staff pilots, attendants, technicians, administrators. Hundreds filled the hangar, the air alive with anticipation. Cameras streamed the event live to every branch of the airline across the country. She stood on the platform beneath the giant Aurelia Air logo, dressed simply, microphone in hand. "When this began," she said, her voice echoing through the vast space, "we faced a storm that could have grounded us. But storms don't destroy what's built to bend. They reveal its strength." Applause rippled through the room. "I've learned something these past months," she continued. "Change isn't a policy. It's a practice. We can write manuals about diversity, train on empathy, post quotes on walls, but unless every one of us believes in dignity as deeply as we believe in safety, then all this is just words." Her tone softened. "What happened on Flight 207 wasn't just my story, it was ours. It showed us that silence has a cost, but it also showed us that courage can rebuild what ignorance breaks." She paused, letting the words settle. "So, here's my promise: this company will never hide behind procedure again. We will listen. We will learn. And when we fall short, we will fix it not with excuses, but with action." The crowd rose to their feet. Some cheered. Others simply stood with tears shining in their eyes. Nora clapped from the front row, her face glowing with pride. Rebecca stood beside her, tears streaming down, whispering to herself, "She did it after the event." Danielle slipped away to the hangar's side doors, craving a moment of quiet. She found Evelyn there, leaning against a crate, holding her phone. "They loved you in there," Evelyn said. "They didn't love me." Danielle replied softly, "They loved the truth." Evelyn smiled. "That's even better." A notification buzzed on her screen. Linda Park's newest article, "From Scandal to Sky the Woman Who Taught a Company to Feel Again." The headline alone made Danielle laugh quietly. "I didn't teach them to feel," she murmured. "I just reminded them they could." That night, Danielle returned home for the first time in nearly a week. Her apartment was quiet, a small haven high above the city. She made tea, sat by the window, and watched the lights flicker across the skyline. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe. Her mind wandered back to that day on the plane, the torn ticket, the whispers, the weight of humiliation. And yet, sitting there now, she realized something powerful. If that day hadn't happened, she might never have seen how fragile her company's humanity had become. The cruelty had been real, but so was the courage that followed. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Nora. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible." Another from Rebecca. "Thank you for not giving up on me." And one last from Evelyn. "You did it, boss. You didn't just rebuild a company. You rebuilt faith." Danielle smiled faintly, replying only, "We did it together." The next morning, she stood at the airport observation deck before boarding a short internal flight. Outside, a child pressed his hands to the glass, watching a plane take off. His mother leaned down and whispered, See that's what dreams look like when they grow wings. Danielle smiled. She'd heard 1,000 definitions of success, but that one, simple and pure, felt closest to truth. As her own plane lifted from the runway, she gazed out the window at the city below. The clouds caught the sunlight in streaks of gold and white. It reminded her of something she'd said once, that respect, like flight, works only when everyone lifts together. The world would go on debating, writing, dissecting her story. But for Danielle Brooks, it was never about the headlines. It was about the quiet victories, the small shifts in how people looked at each other, spoke to each other, listened. Up here, above the noise, the air was clear, and for the first time since the chaos began, Danielle allowed herself to whisper the words that had carried her through it all. We rise. Months passed since the day Flight 207 shook the world. What began as a scandal had evolved into something deeper, a transformation that rippled far beyond Aurelia Air. The company had become a case study in universities, a headline in ethics journals, and a symbol of how compassion could coexist with power. For Danielle Brooks, the noise of fame was both an honor and a burden. She hadn't sought it, she had only wanted fairness. But now, the world saw her as something larger than life, a living emblem of change. It was early autumn when she arrived in Washington, D.C., to speak at a national conference on corporate ethics. The stage was set inside a grand hall lined with banners that read "Integrity in Action." Reporters clustered near the entrance, flashing cameras as she stepped out of her car. Her calm smile was the same as ever, though inside, she carried a quiet exhaustion that success could not soothe. As she walked toward the stage, Evelyn Ross followed close behind, carrying a folder. "I finalized your notes, but you don't really need them," Evelyn said softly. "You've lived this speech." Danielle smiled. Sometimes living it makes it harder to say. When she took the stage, the room fell silent. Thousands of people, executives, activists, students watched her with expectation. She looked at the sea of faces and began, her voice steady and low. "When I boarded Flight 207 last year, I thought I was traveling to a business meeting. I didn't know I was walking into a lesson the world still needed to learn." She told the story again, not as a victim or a CEO, but as a witness to how fragile respect could be. She spoke of Nora's courage, of Rebecca's repentance, of the quiet strength it took to rebuild from shame instead of running from it. "We talk about diversity like it's a department," she said, her voice deep with conviction. "But it's not a policy. It's a promise. And every time we break it, someone else pays a price." When she finished, the room erupted in applause, long, standing, almost reverent. Danielle nodded once, her eyes glistening but controlled. Afterward, journalists crowded around her, asking what she planned next. She simply said, to keep learning. Back at Aurelia headquarters, life had begun to move with new rhythm. The once fractured company now functioned like a living organism, aware of its conscience. Rebecca Hayes had become a full-time instructor at the company's training academy. Her sessions were known for honesty and grace. Some trainees cried during her lessons, others left silent but changed. One afternoon, Nora visited Rebecca between classes. "They asked me to lead a new route international," Nora said, smiling nervously. "My first one since the whole thing." Rebecca hugged her tightly. "You'll be amazing. Remember, kindness travels farther than any plane." Meanwhile, in her office, Danielle reviewed proposals from other airlines requesting partnerships for Aurelia's new empathy-based training system. What had once been a company scandal had turned into a global model. But as her influence grew, so did the scrutiny. Every move she made was analyzed. Every decision weighed for perfection. Late one evening, Evelyn entered her office with an expression Danielle recognized: worry. "There's something you should see," she said, setting down her tablet. On the screen was a leaked memo suggesting that one of Aurelia's regional directors had manipulated new audit data to make their department look more compliant. Danielle's chest tightened. "After everything we've built," she murmured. "It's one person," Evelyn said quickly. "Don't let it make you think the whole system failed." Danielle rubbed her temples. "No, it's not one person. It's proof that reform isn't a destination, it's maintenance. We have to stay vigilant." The next morning, she summoned the director, a man named Alan Pierce, to her office. He arrived looking uneasy. Danielle gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "You know why you're here." He nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I just wanted to protect the division." "Ma'am, I thought if the numbers looked better," she cut him off gently. "Protecting truth protects everyone. Protecting lies destroys trust." Her voice was firm, but not cruel. "You're suspended pending review. But before you leave, I want you to understand something. Every leader has two choices: fear or integrity. One saves your job, the other saves your soul." Alan looked at her, eyes wide with shame, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I hope you are," she said quietly, "because sorrow is the first step to wisdom." When he left, Danielle turned to the window and stared at the horizon. The sky outside was streaked with the orange glow of dawn. For a moment, she closed her eyes, feeling both the weight of leadership and the calm that came with purpose. That same day, a letter arrived at her office, handwritten, unmarked except for the initials L.P. Inside was a single line: "History doesn't remember scandals. It remembers what people did afterward." Danielle smiled softly. Linda Park's handwriting was unmistakable. She placed the letter in her desk drawer beside an old, wrinkled ticket stub, the one torn that fateful day. Weeks later, Danielle received an invitation to appear on a national talk show. "You've become a symbol of accountability," the host had said, "but people want to know, has forgiveness truly healed you?" On the day of the interview, the set glowed under bright studio lights. Danielle sat across from the host, hands folded, her expression calm. The question came midway through the conversation. "If you could go back to that day on Flight 207, would you change anything?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Pain has a way of introducing us to who we really are. I wouldn't erase it because it taught me that dignity isn't given, it's practiced. Every day, by every person." The audience was silent. Then the host said softly, "And forgiveness," Danielle smiled. "Forgiveness isn't for the ones who hurt us. It's for the parts of ourselves that don't want to harden." After the show aired, messages flooded in from all over the world. People wrote about their own experiences being judged, being silenced, being brave enough to speak. The hashtag #JuckWeRise began trending again, not as a reaction to outrage, but as a movement of empathy. That evening, Nora texted her a photo from a flight, two passengers of different races sitting together, laughing over coffee. Progress looked small. The message read, "But it's happening." Danielle replied, "Small changes keep the sky steady." At home that night, she sat by her window again, sipping tea, her thoughts drifting between gratitude and melancholy. The city lights below blinked like scattered stars, each one a reminder that the world was vast but connected. For the first time, she allowed herself to think not of what came next, but of what she had already built a culture that valued humanity as much as ambition. As she gazed at the horizon, the hum of a distant airplane reached her ears. She smiled, knowing that somewhere up there, her people were flying differently now, maybe better. Before going to bed, she opened her notebook and wrote one final line beneath the words, Flight 207. Justice is not the absence of wrong. It is the courage to correct it without losing kindness. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through her office, Evelyn entered with a grin. You've just been named Person of the Year by Global Business Review. They're calling you the woman who gave wings to integrity. Danielle laughed softly. Titles fade. I just hope the lesson doesn't. Evelyn smiled. It won't. You made sure of that. Danielle turned to the window, watching a plane lift into the sky, its silver body gleaming against the clouds. Then maybe, she whispered, we're finally flying for the right reasons. The plane climbed higher until it disappeared into the blue, leaving behind only a thin white trail, a reminder that even after the storm, the sky always remembers those who dared to rise through it. Winter arrived quietly, painting the city in soft tones of silver and blue. The winds along the Hudson carried the faint hum of departing aircraft, their contrails cutting clean white lines across the sky. From her office on the top floor of Aurelia Air headquarters, Danielle Brooks stood watching the morning traffic of planes. To the world, they were just flights. To her, they were stories, thousands of them, each filled with strangers who, for a few hours, shared the same sky. It had been nearly a year since Flight 207. In 12 months, she had seen a company nearly destroyed by its own reflection and rebuilt into something that breathed with purpose again. The reforms had expanded beyond the airline industry. Universities, nonprofits, and even government agencies had reached out to her team to model their transparency programs. It was a legacy bigger than she had planned and heavier than she sometimes wanted. Evelyn Ross entered the office quietly, holding a steaming cup of coffee. You've been standing there for 20 minutes, she said softly. What's got you lost in thought this time? Danielle smiled faintly, just wondering how long change really lasts before people forget why it started. Evelyn handed her the cup. People forget stories, yes, but not the way they felt. You made them feel something real. That stays. Danielle took a slow sip, her eyes still on the sky. I'm thinking of stepping down. Evelyn. The words hung heavy between them. Evelyn blinked, startled. You can't mean that. You are Aurelia Air. That's exactly why I need to leave, Danielle said gently. If the company only lives because I'm here, then I've failed. A legacy should outgrow its maker. Evelyn set down her folder, worry flickering across her face. You've earned rest. Sure, but this feels like surrender. Danielle shook her head. It's not surrender, it's trust. I've taught them how to fly. Now I need to see if they can do it without me. Outside, the sky deepened into morning blue. Danielle watched a plane ascend through thin clouds, its shadow shrinking against the earth. Besides, she added softly, I've spent my life chasing storms. Maybe it's time to chase peace. That afternoon, she met with Harold Green, the board chairman, in the same glass-walled conference room where her journey of accountability had begun. Harold was older now, his once gruff demeanor softened by respect. He listened as she explained her decision, then leaned back with a deep sigh. "I won't lie. Danielle," he said finally, "you leaving will shake this company. Investors trust Aurelia because they trust you. Then let's show them they can trust the culture instead." She replied, "If I stay forever, it becomes dependency. But if I leave now, it becomes strength." Harold was silent for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You've always had a way of making difficult choices sound noble." Danielle laughed softly. "Maybe I'm just good at believing they are." He nodded slowly. "If this is really your decision, then I'll support it. But at least promise you'll announce it your way on your terms." She agreed. The next morning, Aurelia Air held its annual global conference, streamed live across continents. Thousands of employees filled the auditorium, with others tuning in virtually from airports, offices, and homes. On the main stage stood Danielle, poised as always, though her heart was heavy with the gravity of goodbye. "I started this journey believing that leadership meant control," she began, "but I learned it's really about surrender, the kind that lets others rise." She paused, scanning the crowd. Familiar faces: Rebecca Hayes in the front row, Nora Bennett beside her, both smiling with quiet pride. Evelyn stood near the stage, her expression soft but strong. "When Flight 207 happened, I thought it was the worst day of my life." Danielle continued, "But it became the day I found my voice, and through it, all of you found yours too." A murmur rippled through the audience, emotion building like tide. "I came here today to tell you something important. It's time for me to step down as your CEO." Gasps filled the room. The silence that followed was raw, unfiltered. "This company doesn't belong to one person," she said. "It belongs to everyone who chooses integrity over comfort, courage over silence. You are the new Aurelia Air, the kind of company I always dreamed could exist." Tears shimmered in more than a few eyes. Nora clasped Rebecca's hand, both trying to smile through the emotion. Danielle took a deep breath. "This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. Keep listening, keep learning, keep lifting." The crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. Danielle bowed her head slightly, her heart full and aching all at once. Later, after the hall had emptied, she stood alone on the stage, the spotlights dimmed. The silence was almost sacred. Evelyn approached quietly, her heels echoing softly across the floor. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. Danielle looked out at the empty seats. "I think I've been ready for a while. I just needed to believe they were too." Evelyn smiled sadly. "They are, because you were brave enough to be first." That evening, Rebecca and Nora visited her office. They brought a small gift, a framed photo of the new flight training class, their faces full of promise. At the bottom, someone had written in blue ink, "For the woman who taught us how to land with grace." Danielle's eyes misted. "You two are going to lead this company farther than I ever could." Nora smiled shyly. "Only because you showed us how," Rebecca added quietly. "Flight 207 may have been your storm, but it became our compass." When they left, Danielle sat alone one last time at her desk. She ran her fingers along the old ticket stub still tucked in her drawer. Its edges were worn, the tear mark still visible. It was a scar of paper, but also a symbol of everything that had been mended. The next morning, she didn't go to the office. Instead, she went to the airport. Her flight was scheduled for noon, a quiet getaway. No entourage, no cameras, just her and the open sky. At the gate, she handed her boarding pass to the attendant, who smiled warmly. "Have a pleasant flight, Ms. Brooks." "Thank you," Danielle said softly. "I think I finally will." As she settled into her seat, first class, of course the cabin crew moved through the aisles. One of them, a young attendant with kind eyes, stopped briefly and said, "It's an honor to have you on board. My mother told me your story when I started training. She said you changed the way we fly." Danielle smiled, humbled. "No, I just reminded us that everyone deserves to fly free." When the plane began its ascent, she looked out the window at the sprawling city below. The clouds opened like a path to infinity, sunlight breaking through in radiant beams. The engines hummed, steady and strong, and she felt something deep inside her settle a peace she hadn't known she was missing. As the aircraft climbed higher, the world below faded to a soft haze. Danielle closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the sky carry her. For a long time, she'd been defined by turbulence, by battles for fairness, by the weight of expectation. But now, as the light bathed her face, she understood something simple and true. Justice was not just about fighting storms. It was about teaching others how to fly through them. And so, as the horizon widened before her, Danielle Brooks, the woman who once lost her seat, took flight again. Not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but as herself. The sky remembered her, not for the storm she endured, but for the calm she left behind. The story of Danielle Brooks offers more than dramatic moments and first-class seating. It provides timeless lessons for life. First, it reminds us that integrity is not conditional on comfort or recognition. Real courage is often quiet, measured, and requires self-control under pressure. We learn that facing systemic bias or injustice is not just a personal battle, it's a moral opportunity to reshape the environment around us for the better. Second, the story underscores the power of accountability and empathy. Small actions, like speaking the truth or supporting others who are wronged, can create a ripple effect that transforms organizations and communities. Danielle's leadership shows that effective change is not about punishment alone, but about creating structures that prevent harm, support growth, and cultivate moral courage in others. Lastly, it teaches that resilience is strengthened by reflection and deliberate choice. When confronted with adversity, we can either react impulsively or rise intentionally, turning difficult moments into lessons for ourselves and others. These principles are especially meaningful for older audiences who have witnessed social shifts and can reflect on personal experiences of injustice, choice, and the importance of leaving a legacy built on fairness, empathy, and action. Thank you for joining us on this journey through courage, justice, and transformation. If Danielle's story inspired you, please like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart and spark meaningful conversations. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter.